Go back and start asking those questions again about who we are and how we exist in this universe. So that may be pretty intense to try to get into over the next hour, but I want to also just have a really good time with you guys. I hope that all of you, no matter where you are, can see what's on the screen, and I hope that someone will turn all the lights off here. Okay, sorry that I'm making all these changes as we're going, but I'm going to be showing you guys so much stuff on the screen and off off everywhere. Let's pretend we're in a movie theater for the next hour. The less light, the better. So I want to get into all this kind of stuff, but before I do, and while the lights are coming down, I just want to show one video to get across the idea that I'm not trying to go into our eyes, and we tend to believe all of the patterns that we see, and sometimes we forget what those patterns are made of. So let me back up a little bit, and here we are. I'm just more interested in the 1,500 of you guys and me talking. Second, we're able to use multiple sensors to track people. So as you move through the space, the flowers will follow you along and still have kind of fear reactions and interest reactions. Exhibit up. We set this up in a museum, and it took us about 3 weeks to set this up in the museum. We weren't finished with the project, we were kind of running a little bit late. And if any of you build any robots or you build any kind of physical machines, you know that before you run any kind of artificial intelligence, you just run the motors back and forth. You kind of just run them, and it's called open loop. You just run these things over and over, and you want to see what breaks. And so our proposal for the project was to make a machine that could play music, but to make a machine that could play music in a way that no human being could make themselves. So you'll see a video of this in a second as well. We have been making machines now for 5 years, so it wasn't like a very... the cyber for a wine glass, and you kind of put your finger on a wine glass to make a tone. We built 35 robotic fingers that could play 35 wine glasses and make kind of choral music out of that. And then the final instrument, which you see here, is a kind of disassembled marimba, which is a wooden mallet instrument that you typically play with your hands. And we made a robot play it in a way that's totally impossible for a human being. So if we can make sure that the sound is... So in case it's not part of the world around you, and we tend to imagine that the part that you see is the whole thing. And so we tend to think that we actually understand what's going on in reality, when in the real reality we have almost no idea what's going on. So in the electromagnetic spectrum, this is our understanding of all of the types of light that exist in the universe. So everything from gamma rays on one end to radio waves on the other. The part that we can see with our eyes is this tiny little slit in the middle. Maybe it's 1/1,000,000th of the actual light that exists in the environment, right? So in this room right now, you all know there's radio waves because your cell phone works. You all know there's microwaves because we can cook food with microwaves. But if your eyes worked in a different way, those things would be visible. Right now, when you use your cell phone, you don't see any light bouncing in and out of the cell phone. But if your eyes worked in a different way, you would see that light. And if you turned on your microwave to cook food, you would see the way that light was bouncing off the food and heating it up. But all that stuff is invisible to our eyes, and we see this tiny little, maybe 1/1,000,000th of all the light that's going on in this room right now. But we think that what we see, we think that when I look at this plant, that this is what the plant actually looks like. And what I'm actually seeing is less than 1,000th of what it actually looks like. I'm seeing a tiny little sliver of all the information that's involved in the plant, and I just make the assumption that I'm seeing the whole thing. So this is another thing that gets more and more confusing the more that you think about it. Certain other animals, like snakes, their normal eyes are blind, and they have a second set of eyes to detect heat. This is a shot from the show as well of a snake attacking a water balloon. Normal eyes, but they're completely blind. But from millions of years of sitting in the low grass, eyes became useless for them. And their eyes are totally blind, but they evolved a second set of tricks on the show. And we asked them, we want a snake to attack one of these balloons, what kind of balloon should we use? Should we use an orange balloon or a blue balloon? And it didn't make any difference. They said it doesn't make any difference because they can't see the balloon at all, but you have to fill the balloon with hot water. because they see the heat coming off of the balloon, and if you use cold water, it will look like a rock to them, but if you use hot water, it will... Across the idea that I'm not trying to teach you anything. This is one of the guests we have on the show. This is not my tongue. Performance artist who we somehow, every day for his performance, he cracks a mousetrap on his tongue. The reason I show this, if any reason, obviously it's just fun to see, but also we tend to forget that we're looking at a flat screen, right? You're looking right here at this flat white screen, but it's got light on it, and the light has different patterns, and the mind and the eyes are so good. That's how I got here. This is one of the really fun days at work on Time Warp, where we got to jump out of a plane and do some skydiving in order to do some aerodynamics experiments. So what you can see here is I'm holding what looks kind of like a teardrop and a little cube over here, and we're just comparing how turbulent the flow gets when a gas goes over these two shapes. Now, if any of you study fluid dynamics, you can do this on a tabletop for $5. You don't have to jump out of a plane to do this experiment. But if you're working in TV, you have to try to take these experiments and make them as dramatic as possible. So my job was not necessarily about doing science experiments or even teaching science as what we already believe. And so for her, she believed that these things were already alive and responding to her, and so she ignored everything else that was happening to kind of further her own evidence. About 5 years later, I got a commission with my friend Dan by this company Absolute, the Swedish company, to make a project that involved what they called artificial creativity. So a lot of people know artificial intelligence, trying to make machines kind of have some kind of brain and intelligence. Artificial creativity is the idea of, what if these artificially intelligent machines try to make art of their own? We're always making art and we're always making machines, but maybe these machines can make art as well. One of the things I really want to talk about in a lot of different ways is all the ways that you right now walk around and you see certain part of the world around you, and we tend to imagine that the part that you see is the whole thing. And so we tend to think that we actually understand what's going on in reality, when in the real reality we have almost no idea what's going on. So in the light that's going on in this room right now, but we think that what we see, we think that when I look at this plant, that this is what the plant actually looks like. And what I'm actually seeing is less than 1,000th of what it actually looks like. I'm seeing a tiny little sliver of all the information that's involved in the plant, and I just make the assumption that I'm seeing the whole thing. So this is another thing that gets more and more confusing the more that you think about it. Certain other animals, like snakes, their normal eyes are blind, and they have a second set of eyes to detect heat. This is a shot from the show as well, of a snake attacking a water balloon. This is about 100 times slower than normal, which is pretty typical for the show. Now, a snake has normal eyes the way that we have normal eyes, but they're completely blind. From millions of years of sitting in the low grass, eyes became useless for them. And their eyes are totally blind, but they evolved a second set of eyes. And their second set of eyes are called Jacob organs. And they only see heat. They see body heat. They see in the infrared part of the light spectrum. And so when they look around a room like this, and when we look around a room like this, what they see and what we see has no overlap with each other. And yet they also are seeing something and probably assuming that what they see is real, just like we assume what we see is real. But neither of us are actually seeing what's real. We're just both seeing tiny little slivers of what's real. So when we filmed a show like this, we had these snake experts on the show, and we asked them, we want a snake to attack one of these balloons. What kind of balloon should we use? Should we use an orange balloon or a blue balloon? And it didn't make any difference. They said it doesn't make any difference because they can't see the balloon at all, but you have to fill the balloon with hot water because they see the heat coming off of the balloon, and if you use cold water, it will look like a rock to them, but if you use hot water, it will look like some kind of prey, like a mouse or something like that. So the more that I started thinking about this, the more it confused me, because they are seeing something. There's some experience that they're having, and it has nothing to do with our experience. So, as with a lot of the confused, and those question marks can fester for hours and hours and hours after this, this is just a chance to talk, very quickly through some things to kind of trigger some of these question marks. And this is, to me, one of the deepest ones. This is the hardest slide for me to explain in the whole talk. As I said before when we were playing that video of the tongue, you're looking right now at a white screen that has light bouncing off of it. And in this case, it's the light, there's nothing about it that has some information entering your eyes. There's nothing fundamentally red about a certain speed of vibration. And if your eyes worked in a different way, you might see this green, you might see this blue, you might see this not at all. If you cut someone's brain open and you try to look inside, there's nothing red that happens inside the brain when you perceive red, right? You can't like cut open the brain. All you see are there's electrical signals moving around. But on the outside, there's nothing red either. There's nothing fundamentally red about what you're seeing. And the big riddle is, where is this red happening? If it's not actually happening on the screen and it's not actually happening inside the head, red only exists when you combine these two things together. When you have the whole visual system of a human being combined with a certain type of information. And so we tend to just look at these things like a red screen or a green plant, and we think that we're actually fundamentally looking at a green plant. But green does not exist in the plant, and red does not exist in the projection. All of these things exist within consciousness, but we tend to imagine that they exist in the objective world on the outside. So none of you right now are looking at a red screen. All right? That should be confusing. If it's not confusing, I'm not describing it well. This screen is not fundamentally red. Red only happens when you combine this type of vibration with a human vision. Exactly what it looks like. It's a floating light bulb. It's levitating in midair. It's about 10 centimeters away from anything else. And you'll see in a second there's a little engineering diagram for how it works. None of this is normal. It looks like a regular light bulb, but the whole thing is fake. It's got hidden circuitry inside. There's an electromagnet up top, and there's magnets hidden in the bulb that about 500 times a second are measuring where the light bulb is and changing the strength of an electromagnet to keep it in midair. So this is the kind of thing that if your eyes could see electromagnetic radiation across the whole spectrum, you would see this in a totally different way. You'd actually...
Okay, there's a guest lecture by